Welcome. I have two special people here today. I have someone I call my best friend, and then I have someone I call my spiritual father, the Pastor Dwayne Terry and the Dr. Luke Terry, father and son. We're going to be talking about coming of age today. Well, come on, let's just jump right in. I want to talk through the chapter of your book, chapter 11, where you talk about Bar Yeshua. We said coming of age. I know people get all weird about the whole Jewish thing. You said Bar Yeshua. It's kind of on that play on words with bar mitzvah. Kind of break down, he even got to that word, Bar Yeshua. Break that down for me.
Well, so bar mitzvah means son of the law. And, the concept is that a Jewish young man is learning the law. And by the time he's 13, he's come to the point where he is personally responsible for the law. And so with their emphasis on law, our emphasis on grace, I wanted it to be something different than a bar mitzvah, son of the law. I wanted it to be focused on the Lord. So bar Yeshua, Yeshua being the Jewish word for Jesus. So that's
that he was most likely called by when he was
right.
a child.
When he was a kid, so and an adult.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from, just with the emphasis on grace instead of the law.
Very cool. Now, I think when people think of bar mitzvah, they think of the boy that's being held up by all his friends in the chair at his party. But I want to hear just like your memories. How old are you now?
27.
Okay, so we're a long ways away from your Bar
Yes.
Yeshua when you were 13. But I just want to hear kind of what you remember, what it is, what it isn't. Did you get carried around on a chair? I think that's the question everyone wants to know. No, what was it like? Just what do you remember from that?
So you mean like what was the
Your
ceremony.
the layout?
Let's talk
What
about
was
the ceremony for a second.
Okay.
I'd love to hear about that.
Okay, so the ceremony itself, and you may have to help me fill in the
Yeah.
gaps of what I do and don't remember.
Sure.
But the ceremony itself started off with, I don't remember the exact order, I just remember the main components. So I had to lead everybody in worship, and by everybody I mean, I remember a whole
Like you sang?
crowd.
Yeah,
like
there was
it
a bunch
was
of people there. There
was
was
a bunch of
probably
people.
60 people there.
Yeah.
Very cool. Like you sang, you said you led them.
So I stood at the piano and I had a mic and I sang and I led everybody in worship in 2 songs. And then, so that was such a cool experience because you start, you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm just going to have to sing a solo up here. But once I started singing, they kind of
Came
joined
along
me.
with you.
And it was amazing.
worship.
It really was. And then, so that was one part. And then the next part was I spoke on a verse from the Old Testament and then on a verse from the New Testament. Wasn't long, maybe 10, 15 minutes, if that. And just kind of being presented with, okay, here's some verses from the Bible. Let's talk about it in front of everybody. Let's speak on this in an intelligent way. So those are the 2 parts, worship and speaking. And I'm so glad that I was made to do that. I'm so glad that I had to walk through that, because looking forward to it, I was, just super nervous, and am I going to be able to do this in front of all these people? And then doing it was such a surreal experience. So there was those parts for me. And then the last part I remember is my mom and dad coming up on stage, playing a video of when they were...
Did you know they were going to play that?
I had no idea.
Uh-huh.
I had no idea. So I turn around and I start, getting real teary-eyed and played a video of the first night that they brought me home from the hospital, and just praying over me. And then they laid their hands on me and they prayed over me and they said, "You're now a man in our household." And he kind of explained what that meant to everybody.
Yeah.
And then it was a party afterwards. It was cake and presents and hanging out and just...
That's awesome. Was there any kind of elements from that night that, maybe he didn't touch on that you remember?
So the order was we introduced everybody, told them what the night was going to entail, we told them.
Now, introduced everybody. What do you mean, introduce everybody?
We introduced everything. This is what it's going to be tonight. This is the order. This is what we're doing. And then I first went over, these are the things that we required of Luke. So once I told him the order of how things were going to go, then I said, okay, this was what was required of Luke in leading up to today. Here's the things that we made him do with the reading of his Bible and missions and just all the stuff leading up to that. And then I explained to them what he was going to do with them in a service and what I wanted from them. So like he was talking about the worship experience, I encouraged them, please sing with him. This is not about it being a solo.
Not a performance.
It's not a performance. This is about worship. Yeah. And so, and we can talk about different elements of worship, but that's what he did. That's what he wanted to do. And from the keyboard, that's what he did. And then after he did the elements he just talked about, at the end, we prayed over him and blessed him. Okay, now you're a man, and it's emotional for me. But so we talked about what he was going to be responsible for at that point. Like from this point going on, this is what now you're responsible for at the house, and all of that. And then, like he said, then we had a party.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about this when we've talked about this a ton, having a Bar Yeshua coming of age ceremony. And I always thought about it as this celebration of what he's come to, but I hadn't really thought about the witness. That is what, like, did you get a response like after the ceremony from like maybe your friends or like parents of just like the fruit of his life and then them getting to see that all in one night? Like, what was the, like, did you experience like that being a witness?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I had many parents that came to me after that were like, okay, how did you do this? Like, how did you plan for this?
Cue family vision book.
Yeah. Yeah. People were really into just, and of course they had seen all of the prep work, but they didn't hear all the planning that had gone into it and the development of all of it. Okay, now you're here. Now they see it. And so, yeah, lots of people wanted to know, okay, give me this information. Like, how did you get here? How did you plan this? Did you have that experience? Did people come up to you and ask you about it?
Yes. Like, I remember cousins coming up and that saying, that was so cool. I'm just so amazed and blown away that you walked through that, you were able to do that. And, they joke around like, now you're a man,
What does this mean?
Right. I didn't fully know until I walked through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
really
kind
of the ceremony. I want to hear about like we can talk about like post coming of age, but like what was pre coming of age, like those years or seasons leading up to that. What was that like for you that you remember? I know there's like many different areas you tried to cover, like whether it was like personal devotion, like hygiene, like them being missional, like what was that from what you remember?
I mean, for me, it was just living, right? It wasn't like, I don't know, this thing. It was just, okay, this is what we do. I do remember the biggest aspect that played in my head, though, was the idea of submission, and that if my heart was aligned with them, then I could walk through with this ceremony. If my heart was submitted to them already, then that's when they felt comfortable enough allowing me to walk through it. But in terms of other prep work, making sure I had all the books of the Bible memorized, and I remember specifically doing that. I also remember specifically.
This is the question: can you recite the books of the Bible right now?
Oh my goodness!
No, I'm just kidding.
Actually, I probably could.
Let's put you to the test. Let's go right now. Right now.
Oh my goodness! Okay, it's a song.
Okay,
so I have it in a song.
We're gonna be graced with a song by Dr. Luke Terry.
Oh my goodness! Let's see if I can remember how it starts. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, and James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd John, 3rd John, Jude, and Revelation.
Let's go.
Wow, that came from
I about
the
said
recesses.
I about said I need to get Canyon on that. I need to get myself on this one. Okay. Oh, that's awesome.
So that was one aspect. And then just, I remember like, okay, I need to have read the whole Bible before I turned 13.
This is a big part I remember trying to get in.
Yes, and so I had this whole schedule, and I was blazing through some Old Testament. I was reading and reading and reading.
We should talk about that. We should explain that. Go ahead.
Well, so what I remember is y'all went to China 2 of those weeks, like leading up to my Bar Yeshua, and so I remember being at our grandparents' house, and I would spend hours and just reading.
You're 12 at the time.
Yes. And I remember just going through and being like, whoa, there's so much here. That's the main thing that I remember, spending all that time reading and just really soaking in it.
So maybe what we should say, though, is that he had actually read the New Testament through 5 or 6 times.
Right.
So from the time the boys were 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you were
6, started reading the New Testament once a year.
So they read through the New Testament once every year. So he had read through it 6
awesome.
times, the New Testament. But we waited to have the sex talk with them
Right.
until he was 11.
Okay.
Right. And so then at 11, we were like, okay, now he can start reading the Old Testament, because there's so much content in the Old Testament about that. So we didn't want him to start reading the Old Testament until.
What does this mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
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 I actually remember going through it and being like, okay, I can't tell Joshua this part, or I can't, do this part.
Top secret knowledge,
That's right.
baby.
So that's why he didn't start reading the Old Testament until he was 11.
Yeah.
So trying to get all of that in before his 13th birthday, that was what was at issue there.
Yeah. Now, you brought something up interesting, because you said this was just living for you. And I think a big aspect of this is you didn't grow up with the environment that kind of we're growing up in, my kids are growing up in, is this family vision book that parents have. It's this guide. Like, you grew up in those values, but there wasn't this book there wasn't these small groups and these teachings and all this. Like, just what was set apart from your upbringing versus what you could see just from other people, just your experience as a child, teenager, and now like adult?
Yeah. I would say one of the first things is how we spoke to each other. Like, our language was not filled with, first of all, cuss words, but it wasn't filled with, anger. It wasn't filled with, I'm not even sure how to say that, but there was just a difference in the language I felt.
Just even in pastoring these past 5 years, like, I've heard, early on in the teenagers, I would kind of help pastor, but now even the parents I'm walking along with, like, they talk about having a loud home. It's a loud home. Like, it's hectic. It's like there's tons of yelling. Like, what was that?
I mean, peace was definitely predominant.
Yeah.
Me and my brother, of course, would get into it, but it was walking through that. We would. And let's see what else. Another one of the things is, you mentioned missions earlier. That also just felt like a normal part of life. We would go to Guadalajara, or there was another city right out on the other side of Texas
Piedras Negras.
Yes, that we would go to. And that also just felt like a normal part of life. Like, this is what we do. We go and we share the gospel. We go and we spread the word. And also we just felt like we had this family unity because, music was a thing that we all did together. It was a thing whenever we had a family night, like we'd all sit around the piano, or we'd all sit around, if we were driving, we'd turn on the radio and we all start calling out chords, or, that was it. We just had
a language.
Yeah, we just had this sense of unity with us.
What do you remember from like family devotions? Like,
so every morning, we were homeschooled. It was the start to our school day. We would start it with Bible reading. We had, at that time, the New Testament, and we would just walk through a section of it every single morning. We'd talk about it. We'd pray before we'd start our day. That was one of the most consistent things. And then, of course, there was like the summer where you went through Genesis with us. And I just remember that being so cool. You had us write a paper at the end. I felt like, oh, wow, I know all these things that I didn't know before. It felt deep, and I don't know how old I was. I really don't know.
Yeah, you were probably 9.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was just kind of,
that's
when
awesome.
I say normal life, normal living.
We've kind of, what do you have to say?
Well, I was going to say something about the language thing, because that one of the things that we did to build in respect, it wasn't something I did as a kid, was having them say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. I didn't have that growing up. And so we wanted them to have a respect for elders. How do you do that? Well, so we decided to use that tool to build respect in. But so in training them, what Angie and I had to do was we had to learn how to do it, because we had never done that before.
That's funny.
So we decided that in the home, we would say yes, sir, to them, or no, sir, to them, so that it would be part of their language. It would be what they heard, how they heard it.
You're living a value before you train the value.
We're living the value before we train the value. And so that became a sort of a language of respect in the home. But they very clearly, like they would ask us, because again, they were socialized. So they were like, we don't have to say this to our friends. And we were like, no, you don't have to say it.
But sometimes it would come out, and they would be like, why are you saying yes, sir, to me?
But it was just because we did it all the time in the home, because we wanted to live that in order for them to.
Well, honestly, I want to talk about that while we're there. When you were talking about homeschool, being socialized, what was it? Well, just your experience and summary of homeschool, and how'd you like that, like in hindsight?
In hindsight, it was great, because I felt like I could excel in the area, just academically speaking, I could excel in the areas that I excelled in naturally, and then we could spend a little bit more time on the areas that I needed cultivated. And so, and then socially, just in the dynamic of my family, it was great. Me, my brother, and my mom were was the thrust of it, and you would come in towards the end of the day. But it was, I don't know, it felt like we were all kind of in it together. And then we had, we did so many things. We had sports, we did homeschool groups. Church was the main place where my friend group was, that I hung out with people. I had friends that were the stereotypical socially awkward homeschoolers. And I had them as examples in my life.
So I don't want to be,
right,
bro.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
no, I got to do all three: private school,
that's right,
public school, homeschool. I actually jumped around so much, all within the same city, and finished at public school. Yeah. But it's funny, we've talked about how like we grew up in technical different homes, but I feel like in ways we had such similar dads, such similar upbringing. I had a coming of age ceremony. It wasn't like maybe with all the same details and all the same things to it, but I remember my 13th birthday, my dad wanted me to have becoming a man really kind of party, and he had culminated from all the different men in my life, whether it was guys that was 5 years older than me, 10, 25, 40 years older than me, and all of them wrote to me what it meant to them to become a man. And obviously he used trusted voices, but I got this journal of probably 25 men of all that I got to read of all what I meant to them, but what it meant to them to become a man. And then my dad gave me these 4 like biblical values to live by. And it was something that like in the seasons and years to come, he kind of like revisited, and we'd be like, hey, how are you doing with this? Like, do we feel like we are leading courageously with a meek spirit? Do you feel like you are honoring God? And it was kind of the things that we didn't necessarily have a family vision statement, but we had a vision that he had set for me to come back to. So it's cool, like seeing the differences, but the similarities in our upbringing. So
I don't know if I knew that.
Really?
The journal. I mean, I know you said like, they had done that, but I didn't realize you just had it compiled.
Yeah.
And that's so cool.
I want to ask you something in a second, but first I want to see just in your heart, in your mind, from what you can remember being like a child, then becoming a teenager, like having that move from obedience to submission, of like him having your heart, if you can even remember what that was like for you internally. I'd love to just hear from you.
So what I remember is little individual moments. I don't really remember this like, now you have my heart.
This is the time. Bum, bum, bum,
Right.
bum, bum, bum.
Offer it up to you. What I remember is I would have a thought that I felt was sinful, or that I felt was, I'd have that like tug in my chest. And I remember becoming more active in, okay, I'm gonna share that with him. I'm gonna share that with my parents. In spite of, and that was honestly part of, looking back, that was part of the training that I got. Was, I remember you would say, that little voice, that tug that you feel like says, don't tell your mom and dad. That's what the enemy sounds like. That's what flesh sounds like.
Wow.
And so I was able to, I would feel it and be like, oh, that's what that is.
He helped you see ahead
Exactly.
before you even got there.
Exactly. Which is also part of the whole thing of being able to feel like I could submit, even though that's not, yes, that's the language we use, but that wasn't really what was going on in my heart. It was, this is what's happening now. Like, I'm not going to submit to my, it was just, this is what's going on in my heart, and I need to share this.
You had
with
your
you.
heart.
Right.
You're not thinking, let me submit to my father.
Right. It was I need this,
Yeah.
And I was so thankful for it as well. It was, because whenever I did, it wasn't this, harshness that followed. It wasn't this, why are you thinking this? It was, okay. It was understanding. It was, let's work through it. It was, I'm a very slow processor. So he also allowed me, shocker to everyone. He allowed me time to work through those things as well. So it was all those moments kind of together for me.
Yeah. What is cool about this, and I feel like what's so counterculture about this approach to parenting, is I feel like culture's approach to parenting is like they love their little kids so much and they want them to have freedom. And then once they hit rebellion in teenagehood, so they have all this freedom, and then as they get to teenagehood,
Right.
then they take all their freedom away because they don't have their heart.
Take the doors
Whereas
off their
really what
bedroom.
exactly, but what you did is like
Wheels off their
you
cars.
like did the opposite,
Yeah.
and like were guarded, not sheltered, but guarded. You were careful, and then as they got older, really you had this coming of age, and then it moved them into this pre-adulthood, which I think is so cool. I don't think that's the verbiage used in the book, but I think about it like this pre-adulthood, like this safety net years from 13 to 18. It's almost like trial years. I just want to think about just like how you approached that, how you kind of came to that, what that was like as a parent now, entrusting your kid to, you talk about in the book, like having great responsibility, like they now have great responsibility, even though now they have great freedom. There's responsibility that comes along with that. Like, I just want to kind of hear about the responsibility you set for them.
Okay, so in the build up to that, it's very easy to see, okay, the things that you've set as goals for them, are they trying to reach them? And really trying to have grace with them in that. If you see them trying, if you see them really putting forth the effort, all of the things that we just talked about before with the Bible reading and the missions trips and all of that stuff, you see the effort that they're putting into that, and you're just blessing that and encouraging that. But after that, post-ceremony, the things that we talked about were things like choosing your own bedtime.
Yeah.
Like, you want me to
just tell me about some of the things that the freedom they got when
choosing their own bedtime, choosing their own haircut.
Not a good move.
Bold.
I needed direction.
They chose how much time they spent on homework. I mean, really.
Well, didn't you talk about they got to choose what shows they watch, how much they watched it, what gifts they got for other people?
That's right.
Yeah.
All of those things were liberty for them, and I really at that point tried my best to make it where the process was submission has been built. Now you come to me when you need me. Like that's the thing. You come to me when you need me. What are your impressions post? I know there's a specific story you have about post Bar Yeshua.
Well, you mentioned bedtime.
Yeah.
And little Luke. There was one night specifically where there was this show that was kind of interesting or something, and I knew it was getting late. And I remember it was right after it had happened. I was standing on the steps, and I felt paralyzed standing on those steps because I so wanted to keep watching that TV show. And so I was like standing there in between watching it and going to bed and feeling like if I don't go to bed, I'm going to feel awful tomorrow. Like I have to get up at this certain time. I have to do these things, but I really want to. And I remember feeling paralyzed, like not so much the show. It was, I have to make this decision. Yeah. Like I have to be the one
on you
to,
now.
It's on me now. Like I have responsibility, and it was my own internal war of what should I do? Like I have freedom now, I can stay up and watch this.
But I also want to say that we had to deal differently with Luke because Luke had a propensity to feel guilt. So his whole journey for us was, now we don't want you making these decisions out of guilt. Yeah. We want you to do it because in your relationship with the Lord, this is what the Lord would have you do, not because you feel guilt from something. And that was a big part.
Not because I'm afraid of what might happen if I didn't, but because I knew it was the right thing to do.
So pastoring his heart in this was a big part of that journey.
Yeah. I think what's cool is you talk about the pastoring the heart in those pre-adulthood years is cool because, you'll see maybe from Christian parents who shelter their kids until they're 18, and then the kid goes off and does all the things they were never allowed to do because they were sheltered. True. And then you have non-Christian parents who maybe don't shelter purposely, but they put them on lockdown when they're doing all these bad things, but then they turn 18, they do all these things. But this approach gives the freedom from age 13 to 18, gives them the room to mess up. I think it's really cool to see that freedom displayed, but then you have the safety net of the parents there to like swoop in. But like, I want to hear about that from you of like, what do you do when their sin nature kicks in pre-adulthood? Like, how do you manage, like, as for me in my house, we will serve the Lord, but then them having freedom? Like, how do you balance that?
I feel like, if you were, I think this is how I envisioned it from the start, is because Angie and I had people live with us before we had kids. Okay. So I had that very clear experience of what it meant to have an adult live in my home. Right. So that's the way I thought about it. If I had an adult living in my home that was doing something they shouldn't do, how would I address that? Oof. How would I deal with them about
your
that?
Home?
My home.
Let's go. Let's go. My house.
Exactly. So that's how I approached it, was just to sit down and have that kind of conversation with him. But I mean, honestly, that wasn't my experience. So I don't know how much of that I can actually speak to, because I felt like the submission
You got
part
their heart.
of it.
You got their heart.
Yeah, the submission part of it was, I did have those thoughts, which I know a lot of parents have, about the fear of this, but it wasn't that way for me, because they were being submissive. One of the things that I think is a cool part of this, just the line of that you're going down right now,
Yeah.
is for Luke to tell what happened when you got to college, and you.
Well, I was about to say, you were talking about the fear of parents letting go of this. Think about the fear if they go off to college and there's no supervision, which is, what most people experience. So I remember starting my freshman year, and they didn't know how to live, because you have all these responsibilities, you have all this homework, you have all these papers, you have all these tests, while also being a person and having fun. And I remember thinking that, at least for the first month, once those first grades hit, then people start getting, okay, the idea I have to actually. But I remember thinking that whole first year, they don't know how to have any self-discipline to function in this setting where it's this adult learning. People expect you're an adult now, you have to be learning this way. You have to take responsibility for it. Not just knowing what you're going to do. That's not the thing, is having vision to, okay, I know I want to be somewhere. I may not know exactly what it is, but how do I work towards figuring that out? How do I,
Right.
And that wasn't even a mindset. It was just, I'm free finally.
it was
I can
living
actually, right.
Yeah. I think this could be daunting for some people, because I think they see a Dr. Luke who is, about to whether work for someone or have his own practice. He's married to a Proverbs 31 woman. He's, he's at church every time he can. He's a giving man. He's a prayerful man. He'll call you and pray for you. And you see this final product, but it's kind of like, okay, where do I even start? My kid is 3, 4, 5, 6. I just want to kind of talk real quick about when you started. I know you always, from the beginning, wanted to be the primary spiritual source, but really when it came to setting objectives, working to a coming of age, and then pre-adulthood.
Sure.
Kind of talk about that.
Okay, so first I would say, don't do that. Don't work toward anything. What I would encourage you to do is say, these are the things that when they are 13, these are the things that I would like to see, and start there. Don't start where they are, because that's really impossible. Start with where you want them to end up, and then back up from there.
That's good.
Reverse engineer it. And okay, so if they're going to be at a point where they've read the entire Bible by the time they're 13, so this is just the way that it works for me. So I'm going to have that talk with them at 11. So that gives me those 2 years for them to read the Old Testament. This is the way I'm thinking about it, right? So then I'm going to want to make sure in their current Bible reading, they've read through the New Testament so that they can focus on the Old Testament when they get to age 11, because that's a lot of reading. So I'm giving them 2 years to get that done. They've spent the other 2, they're used to devotions, they're used to reading. So that it was that kind of building into, okay, if they're going to have spent time on the mission field, I want them to have the opportunity to go on this kind of trip or that kind of trip. So we planned all of those things. We kind of said, okay, well, during the summer when they're old enough to go, then this is what it's going to look like. And I remember Lucas is a little guy, and he's going to go to Guadalajara, and they taught them how to pray the sinner's prayer in Spanish. And he's a little guy, knowing how to pray the sinner's prayer in a foreign language, go into a foreign country, and actually did do that. They prayed with someone there to receive Christ in Spanish.
That's
so you start at the end. This is where I want them to be. So if it's hygiene, I want them to be taking their own showers. I want them to be brushing their own teeth. So you back that up. I want them, by the time they're 11, I should see them be here. By the time they're 8, I should no longer be having to tell them this or that. It should be far less. The same with discipline. We always envision somewhere around 75-80% of your discipline is done by the time they're 8 or 9 years old. You're prepping into where you're going by starting at the end and working backwards in your planning.
So what you're saying is not taking this step by step. How do I get there? You
right.
Start at the end, set this vision of where you want to be,
exactly,
and then work backwards to
exactly.
that. So, such a cool method, such a cool format. I just want to thank you guys. Honored to know you, honored to hear from you. Thanks for coming and just talking to us for a second. We appreciate you and just
Absolutely.
the book, but we know it's more than just a book for you. This is your life. This is what you've lived out, and so we're grateful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.